our Beckfoot Lifelong Learners podcast.
Hello.
Welcome, Joe. We've got another wonderful guest with us here today, giving up their time to chat to us about things to do with teaching and learning and life. So, without further ado, do you want to introduce yourself?
So I am Joe to friends and colleagues, or Sykes to some of my friends. Mr. Sykes, a PE teacher at Beckfoot. I might be known as students to that PE teacher that's losing his hair, that one that does all the table tennis, the one that does the rugby, the one that's delivered assemblies about bike accidents, or that one that did this lecture on music. So I'm different things to different people, but professionally, Mr. Sykes.
Wonderful. Yeah. Now, this is the Beckfoot Lifelong Learners podcast, so we always ask, is there something that you have learned recently that's had an impact on you in life? It can be something jovial or something serious. What have you learned recently?
Probably in contradiction to what most people have said, like I haven't learned anything recently, but something that I've been becoming like increasingly aware of and kind of appreciating the value of is showing the human behind the teacher and showing that I'm not a teacher cyborg that just kind of does everything by rote learning. It's no, I'm a person, and this is a bit of me, and showing that to students. And it came kind of lots of different stories, but one that happened most recently, which I think is kind of led me to coming on here and speaking, was in the changing room. There was a comment was made, and then one of the students, whilst he was getting changed, was like, "Oh, not like Sir's hairline." And so the kind of teacher thing to do then would be to go, right, you asked you to learn these, now a 2 or 3 because you haven't been polite to me. But what I actually did was I showed the human side of me, and I said to the student, I said, like, that's like really upset me actually. So I've just noticed I've tapped my mic. Sorry if that came, anyone listening. I was like that's really upset me because like you don't know how I feel about it, and like I didn't want like my like the purpose of doing that wasn't to guilt trip him, it was to show the person behind me, and because I have a good relationship with the student anyway, and like you could see like the penny drop, and he was so apologetic. Far more, I think, the impact of me showing the human side of me and the impact that his comment had far more of an impact than using the PLS, the behaviour system, would have done, because he actually kind of took me to one side during the lesson and said, like, I just want to say I am really sorry about that. So yeah, I think
that's what you want to talk to us about in more depth today. The person behind the teacher. Let's get into that then. Cool.
And so it's not. I was speaking to another colleague about this just before coming in, and I said that it's not me kind of on my soapbox preaching like all teachers should like show your vulnerabilities. That you like, it's not that at all, and it's about. I was thinking like, is it a balance? But then like balance is like the wrong phrase, because like a balance suggests that like the two factors are inversely proportionate, and like the more that you show of them, the more that you show of yourself, the more vulnerable you are. And I think it's about like intertwining it and finding the right moments to put it in. And if teachers feel that there is a part of them that they're able to share with the students, then go for it. And if there are parts of yourself that teachers want to share with certain students or with certain classes, then go for it. If not, that's fine. Like you do what you think is right for you.
So what better? So for us as teachers, showing the person behind the teacher, what impact would you say that would have on our? I suppose it's about building relationships.
Yeah. I think hugely, and I think allowing yourself to be vulnerable, if it is that side of you that you want to show to students, I think students that really facilitates relationships, and students, rather than it being like an us and them, it is student teacher, but I can acknowledge that we have these shared feelings that teachers might not be kind of as forthcoming to show. Like we'll show when we're happy, or we'll show when we're angry, but we won't necessarily show like that upset that's kind of like the vulnerable bit in the middle. So like another like example is I had a tutor group a few years ago with a lot of students who posed some challenging behaviour. And there was just one day where I was just feeling really anxious. It was just an anxious day. And so I logged on to the computer, got Sims up, did the register, and then brought up a PowerPoint and just typed, "I'm feeling really anxious today. Like, please could you just listen?" And they all just, like, you could hear a pin drop. And I think initially they didn't know what to say. And then eventually someone said, like, "Oh, sir, are you all right?" And then there were questions of, like, "Oh, what does it feel like? I've never had it. Like, what does it actually feel like?" And like, "Oh, do you do?" And they were asking me these questions, like, "Oh, is it a new thing? Like, have you struggled for a while? Like, do you know what helps you?" And showing them that side of me, again, because it was right for me at that time with those students, kind of opened up a conversation of, like, we're all just on a level playing field, and they kind of took some interest in me as a person rather than me as the teacher. And it kind of allowed me to then see them in a different light rather than kind of having the blinkers on and going, "Oh, there are these students who are troublesome and cause me a bit of hassle." I was able to go, yes, they do cause me some hassle, but actually when I've kind of laid my cards on the table, they've taken an interest in that and they haven't just kind of abused it and kind of taken it the wrong way, which is obviously something that can happen if you don't integrate it and choose the right time, which is why I can understand it can be difficult to...
Yeah, because I was just about to say, like, wow, like, it's such a useful trust building tool, I suppose, in many ways, and not just sharing the anxieties, and, you know, people might not feel comfortable sharing their own personal mental health journeys and things like that, but it makes things more relatable, it makes things more accessible, but also sharing the other side of it. I know, like, you can build some great relationships. We, as PE teachers, we do build some fab relationships through common interest in sport, common interest in music. You know, think those conversations that you have outside of the classroom. And it helps students to see the person behind the teacher, which is great for building that trust. And enabling students to see the person behind the teacher. Have you had to think about ways that you've phrased things or what you've shared, I suppose?
Yeah. So I think in the example that I gave of the tutor time, that wasn't something that I'd planned, and therefore I think if you are planning it as part, because there's a natural kind of link into a lesson that you're doing or PHSE in tutor time, then obviously it's easier to kind of pre-plan those boundaries or pre-plan what you want to share. But in that instance, and in, like, the instances that I've had when students have asked questions, which I want them to, because I want them to kind of be intrigued and take a care, that if there are questions that I don't feel comfortable answering or I don't think are appropriate, I'll just say that to them. I said, "Oh, like, it's a really good question, but I don't feel comfortable sharing that with you, but it is a really good question," and kind of acknowledge, obviously, if it is still a good question, I'm not saying that to whatever they ask, but acknowledging that the question is still a good one so that they don't feel kind of put down by the fact that I'm answering everyone else's questions but not theirs. So yeah, saying, like, "Oh, yeah, really good question, but it's not something that I feel comfortable sharing at the minute." So yeah, just explaining that to them. And then they can also see that whilst I'm sharing the person behind the teacher, I am still a teacher and I'm still setting the boundaries of this conversation, and it's kind of what I say goes.
So the main benefits that you found in sharing the person behind the teacher, what would you say the main benefits you've had are from that side of your teaching, really, your practice?
I think if, like, in other instances, for example, like, if you've made a mistake as a teacher, like if I don't know how to spell jewellery comes to mind, because we've been looking at health and safety in sport, like, acknowledging, like, I've spelt it wrong, "Oh, sorry, my bad, I've spelt that wrong," and then kind of referring back to it. If a student makes a mistake, be it in the work or in the behaviour, and refer back, "Look, do you remember I made a mistake, jewellery. I put my hand up, I said sorry, because that was the right thing to do. I didn't need to make a big song of a dance about it. And then they can go, oh, yeah, I remember when you made that mistake, when you showed that you were vulnerable and you're not this perfect teacher. So they're able to put their hands up and kind of in that environment, in that culture, know that it's all right to make mistakes, because I've made mistakes, I've acknowledged them in front of everyone. When I didn't have to, I could have said, no, I'm right, I know what I'm talking about. It's kind of creating that culture of, it's fine to make mistakes, like I'm a human, you're a human, but this is how you deal with mistakes, or this is an example of how you can deal with it without making it into something that it doesn't need to be.
It just seems like trust, isn't it? It's building these really trusting relationships, which is something that I think we all strive to do. And because if you've got students on side, the benefits are both ways, really, aren't they? Is there any recommended reading or anyone you follow on Twitter or any podcasts that you could push us on to just to get a little bit more about this? I feel like it's something that has got lots of avenues we could go down with it.
Dave and I talk about Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO podcast, where he has lots of different guests on from all different walks of life, and they talk about kind of mistakes that they've had and being open and being vulnerable in some of them, but not all of them. Richard Osman springs to mind. He talks about struggling with an eating disorder and always being told, flipping heck, you're tall. And kind of he explains in the podcast of, I know that I'm tall. You don't need to tell me. Like, yes, I am this TV personality, but I'm also a human. And I've been told that I'm tall all my life. Like, please stop it. Whereas I could just be this fake TV personality of like, flipping out that chair on pointless. I have to lower it down, but I don't, because I'm a human. And he's showing that side of himself. High performance podcast as well, talking about high pressure situations. Not that teaching is always a high pressure situation, but comes with a lot of responsibility and kind of actual pressure and also perceived pressure to be like I've got to be this teacher that never shows that I'm vulnerable and never shows the kind of human side to me. And then the one that I listened to recently was again Peter Crouch talking about a really similar issue and saying people always tell him that he's tall, and he knows that he is, and he knows that he's now got this kind of retired professional footballer kind of happy-go-lucky personality. But actually, this is something that affects him. So he's had to kind of balance the two, and he now carries cards inside his pocket with questions to answer, saying, yes, I am tall. Yes, I'm 6'7". No, the weather isn't any different. No, I didn't. I wasn't born in a grow bag. And so it's kind of showing one side of him of this kind of happy-go-lucky professional footballer, but also like, I've been here before, like, your joke's not funny yet. Like, I'm willing to acknowledge that this isn't the first time I've heard it and show a bit of me behind the kind of character.
Thanks so much for your time, Joe. It's been really, really wonderful to speak to you. And as I've been chatting, we've been speaking about the person behind the teacher, and it's given me food for thought to think back to, what about the person behind the student? And we could probably have another podcast all about that. And I think it helps, it could help, it goes two ways, doesn't it? Like, when students show that behaviour, if we can do the same, afford them the same patience as what we would hope for, maybe, it could dissolve some potential issues. Like, if there's a behaviour that we're not maybe happy with, instead of going in, you were talking about, instead of going in with the PLS, we could say, right, what's wrong, what's causing that behaviour? Because oftentimes there is a cause for it. Not always, but oftentimes there is. And if we took the time to maybe ask that question and see the human behind the student too, we could maybe do another podcast. And that,
definitely.
Real feed for it. It's given me a lot to think about and given me maybe the confidence to show that side of me to students, to help build up that trust and help them share their own experiences and, help them talk about more.
And the person behind the front that they might be like putting on,
Brilliant. Wonderful to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you for having me. Pleasure.
Talking to us about a really sensitive topic. It's been wonderful to speak to you. Thank you so much. The lights have gone off. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. See you on the next one. Thanks for listening.
Bye.